What is up, YouTube people? It's your boy Patty McNinja, and last week we got a game that I was very excited for, Atomic Heart. Of course, since I'm making this video, I've played it and I want to talk about it. So without further ado, let's rock. And like I said, I was pretty excited for Atomic Heart. I'm not the only one making this comparison, but the promo material gave me serious BioShock vibes. Don't know if I've mentioned this on a past video, but BioShock happens to be one of my favorite games of all time. So I do consider myself a pretty reasonable person, so I didn't expect Atomic Heart to be that great. You're not going to compare to one of my favorite games of all time. However, if you are clearly inspired by one of my favorite games of all time, I'm going to be immediately interested in your game. For anyone not aware, Atomic Heart is a first-person shooter set in an alternate history where the Soviet Union basically won the Cold War and became a world power thanks to their advances in technology, especially their robots. You play as P3, a World War II vet who basically has to put down a Order 66, but with robots, where the robots are slaughtering humans. It was developed by Monkfish and published by Focus Entertainment. Atomic Heart was released on February 21st for everything except the Nintendo Switch. As a kind of side note, I did play this on my PC via Xbox Game Pass. It was a day one release. And as an adult gamer, Atomic Heart definitely started off on the wrong foot. This was very annoying, and I think other adult gamers will agree with me on this, that a lot of times, especially on weekdays, you have a very small window to play games. It's usually an hour to 2 hours a night that you can play a video game. And this game was really bad with a lot of like big updates the first couple of nights that it had been released. And so I would sit down to play this game, and that hour or two that I had set aside to play quickly evaporated because there were these big updates. Now I get it, they needed to fix some problems, and this game definitely needed some updates, but it was just really, really annoying that I didn't really get to play it until Friday night. And despite those big updates, Atomic Heart is still a deeply flawed game. It felt like every time I started to get my groove with this game, it would take one step forward, two steps back. It honestly took me at least 2 to 3 hours before I could really get into it. I honestly almost scrapped this review entirely because I was having a hard time finding the motivation to play it. Ultimately, I'm really glad I did, because there were some really cool things that I enjoyed about Atomic Heart, even though it left a lot of meat on the bone. And for anyone out there that thought Atomic Heart could be the quote-unquote next BioShock, you're going to be super disappointed in this game. While it does touch on some of the similar themes that you see in BioShock, it never ever gets close to the level of storytelling that we saw in that game. However, I do want to give them props. The idea of this alternate history where the Soviet Union becomes a world power and doesn't collapse is really interesting. I do have a bachelor's degree in history. I've always been really intrigued by post-World War / Cold War history. So I think that it's a very unique game in that sense. On a personal level, I did find it very odd to be playing this very pro-Russia, pro-Soviet Union game around the same time as the 1-year anniversary of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. However, I do know that this game has been in development for years, and I just think that it was bad timing. But my biggest issue with the story was actually the protagonist. I mentioned in my Dead Space remake review that I love that they gave Isaac the ability to talk. It made him feel much more like a fleshed out character. I felt the complete opposite about P3. I wish he would shut the hell up. He's basically just a cringelord. Imagine a less funny, more annoying Duke Nukem, if that's even physically possible. But honestly, the writing wasn't all bad. I do think that there was some genuinely funny moments, especially in the second half of Atomic Heart. And maybe it was just because I started to tune him out. It did seem like P3 got less annoying as the game went along. The game does kind of start to get pretty serious towards the second half. And as the game got more serious, I noticed his stupid comments less and less. But again, that might be just because I started to tune him out. There are a lot of meta video game jokes in the second half of the game, especially there's a whole thing with a robot and a train ticket that I thought was pretty funny. However, as I've mentioned in past reviews, especially with High on Life, just because you make meta jokes about the gameplay being repetitive doesn't actually fix the repetitive gameplay. And there was a lot of that in Atomic Heart. But at the end of the day, Atomic Heart is a first-person shooter, and the combat was easily my favorite part of the game. It certainly didn't reinvent the wheel, but the gun combat felt great. I especially liked the reloading animations. I have this weird thing in first-person shooters that I want the reloading to feel good, and it certainly did in Atomic Heart. Unfortunately, the same cannot be said about the healing animation. I don't know what it is about modern video games, but it seems like a lot of games are going to this two-handed healing animation, and it just gets very annoying because it basically means that you can't, under normal circumstances, heal during combat. And that's, of course, when you need to heal. To its credit, Atomic Heart does allow you to unlock in the skill tree a one-handed healing animation, but unfortunately I did not unlock that until about 75% of the way through the game. Speaking of unlocking, there are a bunch of different abilities that you can unlock on your glove, and there's a surprising amount of depth to the looting and crafting, which just means all of those things put together, you can really mix up the combat to fit your playstyle. And while some of the enemies do get pretty annoying, there's enough enemy variation that it never really gets stale. And kind of the cherry on top, they do, when there are big waves of enemies, they do play this really heavy metal music, which isn't my favorite style of music, but it was a nice touch that gave this game a lot of personality. And I wish that I could say the same about melee combat in Atomic Heart. Despite having some really cool looking melee weapons, especially once you start upgrading them, they look very cool. It reminded me a lot of the weapons you would see in a Dead Island game, so they look really cool. Unfortunately, the combat left much to be desired because it kind of felt like just mindlessly slashing at enemies. I mentioned earlier, it was really hard for me to get into this game, especially the first couple hours. And it's not coincidence that the first couple hours you have to use a lot of melee combat, and I really just couldn't get into it. And it wasn't just the beginning of Atomic Heart that I had issues with. Honestly, I ran pretty hot and cold with most of this game. It has some serious pacing problems. There are long stretches of really cool action where they are just blasting that heavy metal music that I mentioned earlier. However, on the flip side of that, there are multiple quote unquote missions where you just kind of follow someone around while they talk at you. And I get that video games need those exposition dumps, but it definitely slowed down this game. And there's also sections of open world that I thought could have been really, really cool. And I liked that they were in this game. I thought they were kind of an interesting concept for this game because at the end of the day, it's basically just a dungeon crawler with open world sections in between. And the world looked great. Unfortunately, the execution was just pretty annoying. Mostly, one, the map was pretty much useless. And two, and most importantly, there's this alarm system where these cameras will alert other robots that you're here. And there's almost no way, because there's so many cameras and you don't really know where they are, that you can just explore without getting spotted. You almost immediately get spotted, and it's super, super annoying. And it got to the point that I just didn't want to explore an otherwise cool open world section. And it certainly didn't help the pacing that Atomic Heart had a lot of cutscenes. Don't get me wrong, I did enjoy them. I thought that they looked really good, and for the most part, they were very cinematic, which as a film nerd, I definitely appreciated how much the camera moved and all the interesting shot choices that they made. However, having a lot of cutscenes did seem to slow down the game a bit. But overall, I did enjoy the cutscenes. Like I said, I did enjoy how cinematic they were. And for the most part, they looked really, really good, especially for a studio making their first real game. Sure, you could nitpick some of the graphic imperfections, but for the most part, again, I thought it looked good, and I can forgive a lot of that kind of stuff if the game performs really well. Unfortunately, that's where Atomic Heart struggles the most. Now, like I said, I played this on PC via Xbox Game Pass. I personally didn't experience any game-breaking bugs, but I heard that there were some out there. I'm assuming that's what those big updates were for that I complained about earlier. I personally didn't experience any of them, but this game was buggy as hell. I had at least 2 instances where I had to reload a previous save because the game just didn't recognize that I had gotten far enough in the game. There was one moment especially where I had to refight a boss because I fought the boss, beat it, and then I was locked in this room and you're supposed to go to this elevator, but the game didn't recognize that I was that far in the game. And so it wanted me to go back out and do a thing I had already done, but I was locked in the room and the elevator didn't work because it didn't think I was in that room yet. So I had to literally reload that save before I got into that room, and then I had to fight the boss again. It was super, super annoying. And that happened at least 2 times that I can remember. And that's why every time I think about Atomic Heart, the word that keeps coming to mind is undercooked, because it had the potential to be great. It was never gonna be BioShock, but again, BioShock is one of my favorite games of all time, and I never ever heap those types of expectations on a brand new game. But Atomic Heart had above average combat, some really fun personality to it. It had a unique story, so it had some ingredients where it could have been great. Unfortunately, it needed at least another 6 months to clean stuff up. Now, again, I think of myself as a pretty rational, logical person, and I understand that where we are in gaming culture right now, yes, they could have taken 6 more months to clean things up, and it probably would have been a better game overall. However, 2023 is a major year in gaming. And if they waited any longer, they might have gotten overshadowed by another game. So in the business sense, I kind of understand why they released it now versus later in the year, because look back to even last year with Horizon Forbidden West, which is a major game from a major studio that has a huge fan base. Didn't want to say major again. And it even got overshadowed by another game, Elden Ring. So it could happen to any game. So I get why they kind of, I don't want to say rushed it, because I do think that this game, if I remember correctly, it was already pushed back once, so that might have played a part in it as well. So I kind of get it that they didn't want to be overshadowed by another game. So I do want to give them a little bit credit. Overall, I would give Atomic Heart out of 5 stars 3. I do think that it's worth a play, especially if you're into games like BioShock. Of course, as I've already said several times, I'm kind of beating a dead horse at this point. It's definitely not as good as BioShock, but it's a fun game. It's definitely worth a play, especially if you have Game Pass and you can play it for free. But of course, those are just my thoughts on Atomic Heart. I'd love to hear yours in the comments down below. And since you've made it this far in the video, I really would appreciate if you smash that like button, as the kids say. That really helps push this video to other people. Also, I do put out weekly gaming related content, so if you do enjoy that type of stuff, definitely consider subscribing. If you do subscribe, ding that bell, that way you get notified every week when I do post that content. But until next video, take it easy. What's up, YouTube people? It's your boy Patty McNinja, and this is my boy Yoshi, aka Kitty Boy, and we were just talking and we agree that since you made it this far in the video, you might as well subscribe. You wouldn't want to disappoint Kitty Boy, would you?